We're ready to go live. Here we go. Oh, an error occurred. Wait a moment. Try again. Never a dull moment. We love you're live. Okay, we're live. Woo! Welcome to Marriage with Joy, which is the most open discussion on the internet about the positive, purposeful, powerful, pleasant aspects of living in harmony with matrimony. Marriage with Joy unabashedly discusses the most interesting questions raised by listeners. Our informed and informative panel addresses issues with thought, wit, and aplomb. Voted best of the web 2 years running. Good day, beautiful, bountiful, beloved, immortal beings, and good-looking people. Remember, you're good-looking. Jobs are looking for and finding the good. We found good in abundance. You are going to be amazed, enthralled. You're going to be running around the house shouting joy when we share with you some of the interesting ideas that we've been discussing over the past few weeks, getting ready for this particular edition of Marriage with Joy, the most beneficial hour in the entire world, talking about this great institution called marriage. And it is especially good to be discussing it with our remarkable panel, which is, of course, wonderful Dr. Diane Medved up in the far west corner of the country, excluding Alaska, and northwest corner of the country. And down in the southwest corner of the country, we have wonderful Maura Sweeney. And then southeast. Yeah, southeast corner, northwest, southeast.
The west part of Florida.
And the southwest corner will be Lori McDermott. We don't know where she is at the moment. She's lost, but we'll find her, I hope. And she's in the Manhattan Beach around there. And then I'm in the desert. And that's part of what we're going to discuss today, by the way, is the whole idea of this concept called the wilderness. The wilderness was first made people became aware of it when it had to do with Winston Churchill, when he was outside the government for decades. And very few people would listen to him, even though he was quite correct on almost every subject, almost, not all, almost every subject, especially regarding or regards the rearmament by Germany and its warlike stance. And of course, it did lead to war, and people were just not capable of listening to him. So we're in the wilderness when we're talking about marriage, because it seems that we're swimming upstream, which is okay, because Diane, as I said, lives in the Northwest, so she understands about salmon and how they go and they do what they have to do, and against all odds, by the way. If you ever examine what salmon do, you say it's not possible. You're making that stuff up, because it's not natural, seemingly, and yet it's the most natural. And that goes to the segue for marriage, because we're going to discuss a study. It's a new study, but as Diana is going to point out, it's relatively old in the sense that it's validating things that she wrote about in her book, or several of her books about marriage and not divorcing. But it's interesting, as Maura has pointed out, and we'll talk about this in just a few minutes, that it's coming out in the Wall Street Journal again. It's being brought forth again to people because it has a study of over 11,000 nurses, and essentially found out everything that we've been talking about on this webinar, which, by the way, I'm happy to tell everybody will be a podcast. We're moving from webinar to podcast. So you might think, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is actually twofold. Number one, as a podcast, we will be available on many more platforms. The whole thing with Spotify and all the other places like that. So many millions more people will be able to share in the genuineness and authenticity of what we bring to everybody, and the wholesomeness. The other point is that the study, again, that is Diane pointed out, has been some rehashing things, but it makes the categorical statement that marriage is not in all societies, but in most every society, going back millennia, that marriage is a fundamental aspect of communal living, and that the potential demise or the shift away from marriage is really not beneficial to society, and more importantly, not beneficial to the individual members of society. Hello, real human beings. So when it comes down to it, the relationship between two people in a marriage situation, and again, it could be, I'm personally more in favor of men and women, or a man and a woman together, because I think it is really the most beneficial for the two partners and potentially any progeny that they bring into the marriage. But then again, loving people are more beneficial to raising children than non-loving people. So, hello, I'm on record for saying such a thing. The other piece I want to bring out before we go into one or two of the questions that we have is there was a great article that I saw also in the Wall Street Journal mentioning a person. Her name is Alicia Keys. Now, I know Alicia Keys exists. I never heard her music. I'm not saying anything one or the other, but I think she seems to be a very stable, pleasant, upbeat person. She's married, and she and her husband married, I think now more than 25 years, and they have two children. And again, just because I think names and people are fun. So Alicia Keys is married to somebody named Sweet Beats. That's his stage name. Okay. But they have two children, a boy and a girl. One is named Egypt and the other is named Genesis. So I thought that was also very funny because we are recording this right now at the end of March in the year 2023. And in just a week's time or so will be the holiday of Passover. And I think almost everybody in the world knows what Passover is or is about. And it's the Jews being rescued from slavery in Egypt by God and being brought out to serve as a beacon unto the world. So I thought it was very prescient and funny that Alicia, I have to have her on our podcast, should name her children Egypt and Genesis right now in the eve, because in the book of Genesis, and then going is when the Jews go down into Egypt in slavery, and then they're brought out from there. So, okay, just the thing. But Alicia Keys has a very happy relationship in her marriage. And this is especially important because the first question we're going to field in just a moment, and I'm going to read something to you because they asked her in this article, what does she think is the secret of a happy relationship or marriage? And she mentioned two things or three things that I'm going to say, and then we'll talk about a question we have. So she wrote, or she said the following, apparently: really carving out the time for each other. We all struggle with it. There's so much to balance. There's much to do. Running, doing things, school, kids, career, just stuff. That time together with you and your partner is so priceless. And to carve out that time and to make that important time daily shows love. In other words, time and love are equivalent, the way she's saying it. And by the way, I'm not in any way arguing one way or the other, but I think she's actually correct. And then you remember why you just like to be with each other. What's interesting about each other. So one of the questions that I've had, we had many, many questions coming into this particular session, is, in your opinion, Dr. Diane Medved, author, raconteur, article writer, beautiful, wonderful mother and grandmother, and a friend to many. From your position as a happily married woman now for decades, what do you think is the most, how should we say it, interesting part of spending time together? In other words, allocating time for each other. Is that not one of the most important aspects of creating an ongoing successful marriage?
Yes. Yes. I think it's really important, of course. And the way I look at it is that marriage can and should be each partner's safe haven. So if you look at having your marriage as your touchstone, then you want to connect in the morning, and it gives you a foundation from which you can go out to the day. You have love in the morning. You have a conversation in the morning. You touch base in the morning. Then you can go out during the day and experience your separate realities. Although many of us like to be with our spouses and work together even. And so that's a shared reality. But even so, at the end of the day, if you come back and carve out, I don't think it's carve out, it's run toward the other person, because you can't wait to share what you've done today with the one person that you know is going to be receptive, the one person that you know that understands you better than anyone else. So when you come back at the end of the day and you share you sit down and share what happened to you that day. That's fulfilling because it's like closure on things. You can get feedback. In Jewish philosophy, as you know, we say the marital partner is the Azer Kenegdo. That's the helpmate, the helper who's opposite you. He or she is sitting opposite you and feeding back all the things that they hear, or maybe giving you feedback that is not what you want to hear. But in any case, you know that person's coming from a place of love. And so you can trust it. And to have that touchstone during the day, at several points, ideally, you could pick up the phone and talk to each other, even if it's just a minute to share something that happened. The more you have contact, the carving out, as Alicia Keys says of it, is very important. And that's in contrast to what you were saying, Barry, about a wilderness. An emotional wilderness is when you're going alone through foreign territory, hostile territory, unsure territory, even if it's friendly. That's wilderness. And that's actually the first wilderness. You said it had to do with England and the World War II. No, it had to do with the Bible and people going through the wilderness next week on Passover and finding out only later where they were going to go next, going unsure and relying 100% on God for the man that would fall and sustain them, for the water that would turn from bitter to sweet, all the different things. That was a symbolic wilderness for all of us because we don't really know what's coming next. And the Jews didn't know what was coming next. They'd come out of slavery. They really realized that it isn't them that's in charge. They realize that God is in charge. They realize that there are circumstances that shape everything that goes on, and those are controlled by God. So I think if we can have that appreciation for the fact that we are not in control, but we do have a safe haven in our marriages, and we can come back to that touchstone and be rejuvenated and be revived and be encouraged, then I think that's what makes marriage, is the communication that you have on a regular basis.
I'm very heartened by your use of the term safe haven, and that the being that you choose to share life with is exactly that the analog to you, the ability to give input, feedback, that is always for growth. It's not ever done, again, in a marriage with joy, not to be needling or hurting. And I'm going to mention something else interesting enough. I found it fascinating. Again, I don't know her music. She looks like a very fascinating person. She now gets up to something called the 5 a.m. Club, which apparently is a new thing happening in America, which is great. I'm a 5:23 person for many years. I used to be a 4:22, but that was before I got ill. But she said she gets up around at 5 a.m. and that she and her husband speak. So it's what you said. You in the morning, early morning time, you communicate, even if it's just a matter of just, hi, I love you, and what a wonderful sleep, and it's great to be alive. And then reconnecting during the day or towards the end of the day is a wonderful process, which not only sustains, I want to get away from that word, not just sustains marriage, but makes it interesting and tingling and exciting and fascinating, because who does know what's going to happen next? I mean, for the good or the better. So wonderful, Maura. By the way, I just got a text from Lori. She's saying she's in tough traffic. She'll be here soon. But hello, she lives in Southern California. Traffic and Southern California go together. Okay. So wonderful, Maura. What would you like to add to this particular question about using Alicia Keys as an example of carving out time for each other, making sure that there is that connection, and that, like for you and Jimmy, I know thank God you've been together for decades and love being together because he's a playful guy. But the point is that, as are you, a playful woman. But what is it that you feel is unique or special that you can add and share with people, something they can do to bring out time together?
You know what? I'm so glad you brought that up. I don't know if you saw my expression. Because time is, for me, very, very important because I'm a big communicator. So it's so important to me, but it's right there in front of my nose. And when you mentioned it, I thought that's so obvious, at least for me. Diane, you used the word safe haven. As you were speaking, I had another word come to mind, but I think they say, well, they give similar aspects of the same kind of flourishing that we're enabling here. All I got was the word anchoring. Think about our culture. We have become so busy, and just step out. I'm big at that. Step out of what's going on and look at it as a whole. People have become very task oriented. They're interrupted constantly, and many people are on their own path. They live inside their own head, or they're living on the phone somewhere and they're talking to somebody on a computer. But the word I got was anchor, especially early morning, late at night. If we are only living for ourselves, only living for what's in front of us, the work, the next paycheck, the bills that have to be paid, the classes we have to go to, whatever it might be, we can easily get lost. Our soul could get lost. And I think this is why it's so similar. My word that I got was anchoring, because having someone, funny when I think about my husband and me, we're like yin and yang. There are many things that we just so are alike on, but I love the fact that he's got male energy, I've got, woman's energy. And so we are able to go back and forth. He can look at me in our conversation and say, did you think about this? Did you consider that? Or share with me something, skills he's got, perspectives, whatever. And the same is true with me. So that yin and yang combined with time somehow helps me, and I believe the same would be true of my husband, anchor ourselves, not only with ourselves, with our marriage, but even in our place in the world. And if you want to go further, because I often speak about things involving spirituality, so much of our lives are really internal. And unless we take time in an intimate setting and share some of the deepest thoughts and desires and challenges we have with someone else who could look at us with a level of commitment, somebody we trust, somebody that has our best interest in mind, we're missing something that we don't even. Hi, Lori. We're missing something that maybe we don't even know is there until we have opportunity to experience it. Now, again, I'm describing an ideal environment, but it's also an ideal for me having that time.
And you do live in an ideal environment, as does Diane and Lori and Barry. Thank you. So we are all ideals. Everybody else in the world is living up to our ideals. The reality of this wonderful webinar, now about to become a podcast, is that what we do, we live what it is that we talk about. And that's why we're really dedicated to this one time a month about talking about one of the greatest institutions in the history of the world, which is marriage with joy. So I want to make mention that before we introduce wonderful Lori, is that Diane, you and Maura are exactly in simpatico, because even if you have a safe haven, you still need to anchor the ship. So you're working together on that particular situation. And I was reminded, I was in a very large conference not long ago. I think it was, last week. And I heard two interesting people talking. And it had to do with marriage, but it was mostly about the interaction of the male and the female. And these two people were a woman named Patty Stanger, who most people don't know, and John Gray, who most people do know because of his book, Men Are From Venus and Women From Mars. No, it's Men Are From Mars and Women From Venus. Yes, thank you. Of course, Women and Venus. Thank you. Okay. And it was one of the most remarkably interesting, I think went on for about 58 minutes of back and forth. Patty Stanger is well known in her world as what she's the millionaire's matchmaker. And she had a reality TV show, and she's just very funny, upbeat. And Diane, you'll especially like this, but so everybody else listening, she is, as she says, a third generation Yenta, because her mother was a matchmaker and her grandmother was a matchmaker. And now she gets paid a lot of money for doing matchmaking. Unfortunately, she's not married anymore, so she's for herself. But she and John Gray were talking about the influence of testosterone and estrogen and how the interaction of the male and the female throughout the day can lower or raise both of those particular aspects and therefore create greater harmony, greater sexual harmony, greater intimacy on every level. And it was just so fascinating to hear back and forth, fast and fast. If you ever had a chance to listen to John Gray, he is a character and a half. He's just too funny. And they were talking about, you mentioned this, Maura, about what we call PI. PI stands for pie. But in the world where, let's say, I inhabit, or Tony Robbins, we call it pattern interruptus. And it's really important to be able to interrupt the things that are happening in one's life on a regular basis, or else you can lose your soul or just go away, because time needs to be anchored in a certain way. So first of all, welcome, Lori, down in the southwest corner of the country. And she is a person who loves Los Angeles traffic. So she just did it to make everybody aware that's what happens in her life. So we're discussing two things. Number one is an article that I sent that is, Diane has told us is a rehash, but it's still an interesting article about the proven fact that women especially are not just happier emotionally, but physically much more able to withstand the pressures of life, and they live longer. Not a bad thing. If you can be in a situation that's going to enable you to live longer and live better, wouldn't you like to be in that situation? Well, yes, that's called marriage. Isn't that interesting? That's what the study shows. Over 11,000 nurses, 11,830 nurses, and they found that by being married, you can literally reduce the stress and the tension by 35%, and therefore increase longevity, but not just being older, but with a greater verve and vitality of life. So the question on the table comes, wonderful Lori, would you agree, because you're the wife expert, that a healthy marriage will contribute to greater physical and mental and spiritual well-being?
Oh yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
what
good. Thank you.
Yeah, hell yeah. You're side by side with someone who you get along with, and even if you didn't get along with it, it's still, happiness is an inside job. So if you're walking in the shoes of being happy, and your partner is happy, that just makes you stronger as a twosome. And moving forward in life, anything that comes in is something that you digest and they digest, and you just thrive better together. It's a wonderful thing to be married a long time with someone that you actually really care about. I know there's 3 people on here that have been married way longer than me. And, it's very admirable. I tell people, if you meet anyone who's been married more than 50 years, that is time to pause, ask questions like, how'd you do it? And, make them feel like they won an award, because it's not easy.
So what do you do? And we were talking before about the idea of, I mentioned an article that I read in preparation for this from a woman named Alicia Keys. She's a famous singer, if you didn't know. Mm-hmm. And she and her husband married 2 decades at least now. And she has 2 kids, wonderful names, Egypt and Genesis. I love it. Egypt is the boy, Genesis is the girl. And she was mentioning that she and her husband carve out time to be with each other. And I wanted you to speak about that, about really making time. Let's avoid the car for the moment, but making time to be together, let's say in the morning, in the evening, but maybe even sometimes during the day, but actually make sure that you make time to do that. Is that a recipe for a happier marriage?
Oh, yeah, because then you stay connected. If you're not seeing each other and talking about your wants and needs or what's happening in the day, you're making assumptions of what your other partner is doing. And if you make assumptions, they say like 97% of them are wrong as well as negative. So if you're making an assumption of your partner, it's never a positive one. So if you think about your day, so for example, I tell my wives who do get back together with their husbands, it is you have to have a weekly date night someplace different. Don't go back to the same restaurant. And then on top of it, there should be some kind of little powwow you have every day just to connect and go, I see you, you see me. Because how many people do you know who are on their phones? Nobody takes the time to be with each other and to talk to each other. And there's strong couples spend that time together to be with each other. What she's talking about though is like putting each other first. To have those, my parents used to have a cocktail. When my dad would come home from work, my parents would have a cocktail together in Chicago, and my dad would bitch about his day. My mom would go, oh, while she's cooking dinner, she'd sit down. But that was their time together that they look forward to, and it made them a stronger couple. If you don't have that time and no one has time for each other, what do you have? You have nothing. There are always going to be things that distract you. And I will tell you, this week, today's Wednesday, I've had 2 families that we know of get the news that someone has cancer. What happens when a family discovers they have cancer? Everything stops. Everyone stops. Life stops. And suddenly your phones are down because that's not important. Now what's important is how do we fix this? How do we solve this? One of them's terminal, got 6 months to live, maybe longer with the chemo. But can you imagine? Like, that's why we stay so connected, because I'm going to die in 6 months. Suddenly you look at your spouse and you're like, I've got so much to make up.
So this is wonderful. I love what you just said here about assumptions. And even with people who've been together for decades, you can make assumptions. And as you said, 97% of them are not right, because we think we know what the other person is thinking. And yet I can tell you from 45 years of marriage, I'm wrong almost every time. And when I asked my wife,
right?
And she said, no, that's not what I was going to say. It's not what I was thinking. I said, but. And she said, well, yeah, but you missed this and that. So it's so wonderful what you just said there, because it's so easy to presume that we know because we've been here. Well, hello, we're together every day. We see each other. Therefore, I must know what you're thinking and such. And yet it's not the case. And the ability to live in time and space. So Diana mentioned earlier, so in Jewish philosophy, we talk about being long-lived. And the important thing is not so much long-lived in terms of years, but in days. Because when you can count your days, that's really good long life. Okay, we're married 45 years, but yes, it's really a day-by-day process. And every day can be new. Not only can be, it is. God forbid, like you said, something untoward happens that is very negative, the big C. Or the big D, but the big, that stops things. But the ability to live in the moment with people that you care about. I mean, is there anything greater in life? Just to be able to tickle each other. I mean, seriously, tickle each other. It's one of my favorite things to do in life. I even tickle myself sometimes, but it doesn't work as good. And I do, by the way, I still laugh. I tickle myself and I laugh only because of my, what do you call it? When I was paralyzed, I lost a lot of sensitivity. So I used to be, if you came near my bottom of my foot within 3 inches, I would start feeling it, but now you can tickle it all day and nothing happens. But still, I love it. So it's that ability to have playfulness within this context that you've been saying so wonderfully, Diane, of the safe haven. That is truly fabulous. And it brings on, I think, the essence of all of us. Maura just sent us a note saying that she's having internet issues. So as long as there's only internet issues, that's okay. But we'll just she'll keep trying and get her back in again. So let's go to the next phase in this. And I want to mention two things, because in this article from the Wall Street Journal, which again, Diane mentioned that she had put in her book years ago. Okay.
Better studies, much better.
Much better studies. But the important thing in this particular article that I thought was of interest is that they used the following words: our findings were striking. In other words, when you start seeing information come out that says categorically that being married will give you longevity, will give you more harmony, will give you a better life, well, then the idea that we are pushing aside marriage is a prescription for destruction. So we're already in over our heads in our society at the moment, where it comes to this ability to talk about marriage in a positive, purposeful, powerful, pleasant sense. And again, one of the reasons why we're applauded, kids. You should know. I get lots of emails saying, "Hey, this is so good you even talk about it," because not many people are discussing it. So one of the questions I would like to raise here is, Diane, and you've done most of the research, but again, Maura and Lori also work with people on a regular basis. From your research, did you find that marriage really does add to the true longevity of life?
Well, yeah. I mean, from my research, I mean, page after page, quoting studies. I'll give you, let's see, one study from McGill University included every piece of research ever done on the topic, covering 600 million subjects. Then I wrote, you read that right, 600 million.
Wait a minute, that's not 600 million people. That was 600 million
subjects.
600 million people?
People, individuals that were subjects in the study. And this is a meta-analysis of several studies that met certain criteria for it. And it says the results are even more emphatic. I just quoted two other studies that were enormous that said the same thing. Divorced people had a 30% higher chance of dying from all causes than their married or single counterparts. And the mortality risk for divorced men was a whopping 37% higher than for other men. And the study that you cite didn't cover men because it was a nurse's study, which is widely used and exploited by all kinds of researchers. And they were talking in this Wall Street Journal piece that you referred to for controlling for certain kinds of influences on it, such as age and poverty and where one lived and all these things. Controlling is a statistical analysis method whereby you hold certain things constant and then you see if everything else changes as a result of that. And the truth is that there are many things that affect longevity. For example, Hispanic Americans live, I think it's something like 10% or 10 years longer than white people in America.
Wow.
Who knew? I know, but you see, this is true. And statistically, what I would say, your question, Barry, to answer it, is myriad studies show the benefits of marriage in many realms. And I think that looking just at longevity or just at incidence of cancer or incidence of other kinds of physical things is not the most important way to see marriage. I think marriage is a very personal, core of my being, heart of my hearts, love of my loves kind of relationship that cannot be duplicated. You love your children with your life. You die for them for sure. But it's not the same kind of relationship. You love your parents beyond description. They gave you life. You're indebted to them. But it's not the same kind of relationship. And someone who can cultivate a good marriage has a real accomplishment, because there's no one in life that doesn't want that kind of connection. There's nobody who wants to be alone or lonely or wants to be disconnected or to lose that sense of groundedness. And marriage, to me, is that. It is not just all these financial rewards and physical rewards and of this earth kind of reward. It's a soul kind of reward. You know, they talk about your marital partner being your soulmate. And that is what you strive for. To have someone whose soul is aligned with yours, someone who wants the best for you no matter what, someone who is willing to go through the worst that you have to go through with you. And my husband had cancer, and that was the worst time of my life. I don't want to ever see anyone suffer. And I don't want to be the one who has to be a nurse and do physical things that make me very queasy. But for him, I'm there. And if you can have that relationship, then I think that's an accomplishment of a lifetime. And
So
that's
this,
what I think we have to focus on, not the benefits of marriage when it comes to how many years you're going to live or how much money you're going to make, but making a connection that is bedrock for you and being able to trust the other person and be trustworthy
very
yourself
good.
or the other.
So I was waiting for you to bring in the T word, because it is the fundamental bedrock upon which this is all based. Like you said, safe haven, anchor, but it is truly based on trust and that connection. And you did say something earlier, though, that I think in a divorce, actually men suffer more than women in terms of a divorce. They tend to, I don't know, can't speak for all men, obviously, but men get lonely, and they get to be morose, and they get to be unkempt. I mean, it's really hard to keep a man clean. You know, it oftentimes needs a woman you want, because, or a partner, because you want to groom yourself. You don't want to just be walking around.
Barry, I love you dearly, but you're such a sexist.
Thank you. Wait a minute.
Right.
Thank
No, he's
you.
right.
Yeah, I'm
No,
so happy to say that.
Men get unkempt. Well, my husband's unkempt and he's married to me, and that has nothing to do with being connected. I mean, let's face it, men
Wait a
and
minute.
women are
Okay,
individuals.
right. There's always the exception that proves the rule. You're wait a minute, Diane, you're right. Now, by the
he's
way,
watching too.
right, and of course, in my situation, my wife had to go and live through me being paralyzed in front of her. I mean, it was just, hard to imagine. That's why complete trust and such. So, wonderful, Maura. Let's talk about this in sense of really the question is that let's use Diane as a jumping off point. That intimate connectivity, that connection that transcends any other relationship. Because you mentioned parents, you mentioned children, friends. There is nothing that compares to the relationship of husband and wife, or two significant beings joined in what we'll call holy matrimony. Truly, it's holy. It's not just a matrimony, it is a holy state of being that one uses. You put the W in front of the holy now, and it becomes holy. WHOLLY as well as HOLY. So speak about, if you would, from your personal point of view, what it means to have this deep, intimate, completely trustworthy connection.
Good question. I don't know if I ever shared this on our webinars, but I did not want to get married when I was growing up. I kept putting it off until maybe I was 30, but at that point, when you're young, you think 30 is really old. I did not envision myself in a marital situation. Not that I was looking for anybody to live with either, but when I met my husband, 1977, the very first time I met him, you want to talk about a soul connection. The first meeting, I thought, this is a man I could take anywhere. He will fit in with anywhere we go. He's comfortable on every sector of society, very comfortable in his own skin, and he's such a listener. And had I not had that soul kind of a connection with him, because I remember after that, I had no interest in any other men, never. He told me he wanted to marry me even before he met me. I was busy singing with my guitar. Now, that, you're right. It's unlike any other relationship that we have, whether it's with friends, parents, siblings, children. Very, very unique, and unlike any other relationship. But there are elements of it too that I think through the process we gain flexibility, resilience, personal growth. We learn how to endure through things. And somewhere in there, I know both of you just mentioned health issues. My husband and I have both had health issues over the past few years. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I never knew in my life what it was like to feel so vulnerable. And my husband was there for me. It was so touching for me." And then he has had ongoing issues with his heart situation. Um, and it required us to make some changes. But rather than pulling us apart, it has brought us to new levels. So, as much as you might think during marriages, it's not always the bed of roses, but there's something to it that ends up making things deeper, but also adding more facets to the relationship and to the individual members. So, it's a very, you said it's a holy thing, which it is. It's a dynamic thing. And maybe without it, there are aspects of ourselves, aspects of another, and aspects of God. And what he's looking to develop in us that we may never tap into. But I want to say one more thing. Sounds like it's on the sideline. Diane, you mentioned that among the Hispanic community, they tend to live 10 years longer. Now, I didn't have any of the details on that, but in our area, it's very diverse. And one of the things I always notice when I'm out, we have a lot of Hispanics in this immediate area, and they're so family oriented. It's the mother and the father and the couple of kids, and the mother's cooking, and she may be home with the kids. I immediately saw in, let's say, in the community, what you were discussing that you discovered through empirical studies, that is a big aspect of the Latin community, that they are married, have the kids, and stay together, even if they do have internal problems. Interesting that it contributes to longevity.
So we'll be discussing on the next session about this idea of generational process and how it impacts people, because you can have obviously a great marriage, deep connection, but if you also, in addition to that, if you have the ability for kids to see grandparents and vice versa and things like that, now you're really creating an atmosphere that contributes to life, because that's really what we're talking about, life. So wonderful, Lori, in your relationship with your husband and the deep connections that you have, because you've been through stuff. So has the going through stuff created a greater, deeper bonding and more trust?
It's an interesting question. One of the I have come to have a new insight into marriage. I feel like marriage is a step. You get married when you really want to get to know yourself, and you really want to get to know and understand humanity and all the things that are really wrong with you. Because if you don't know what they are, your partner will tell you. So, and as you grow together, like when people say, "Oh, we grew apart," they got to a place where they're both were driving each other crazy, and no one wanted to grow and change. But someone has to be the good person to go, "You know what? I do these things wrong, so I'm going to shift and start changing." And then the other person starts mirroring each other, and they grow together. Versus everyone goes, "Well, you're terrible, and then they start to go this way. So I have learned, because we had a little shift. And when we shifted, one of the coolest things that I discovered is during our shift when he was gone, was that I had a choice either of blaming him for all of our problems or saying to myself, well, what did I do wrong? And back then I thought I was perfect, let's be honest. But when I really slowed down, I started to figure out, like, no, there were some things that I did wrong. And I just didn't look at that. And if I put up the white flag and took a chunk of a humble piece of pie, I really saw where I failed. And with him or without him, I am responsible to come to the table as a wonderful person. And so when two people figure that out and they can come together as two wonderful people, which you thought of when you were first married, you're like, we're both wonderful, it's going to be great. And then all this stuff starts going wrong. But if you can get back to that, like we're both wonderful, perfectly imperfect people, we can get through anything. And so that's the part that I think marriage is like this petri dish of like consequences and problem solving that you had no idea what was coming. I sometimes go to weddings and I feel like an old person in the back of the room when they're like, we'll be together forever. And you're like, just wait, honey. You have no idea what's coming. Like what you thought was going to be a marriage is like not even that oath you take till death do us part. I'll be there for you, good times and bad times. If you knew what that was going to be, if you knew what was coming, you might not say yes. But the trick is to realize there are going to be things that you face that you have no idea what's coming. And if the two of you just hang on and decide we're going to be here for each other, really, and when you start to go like this, just one person changes and go, okay, I'll be here. And they come back together. It is the most unbelievable experience you can have because then you get to the other side. And then it's even amazing. It's better. That's what I teach.
I'm really happy that you mentioned that two perfectly imperfect people. You said that. That was a great line. Perfectly imperfect people. Because we had discussed this in earlier shows about exactly that situation. By definition, one may think one is perfect and that he's perfect, and she's perfect. And then when you find out not, I was going to say something, but I can't say it even on our show here. But when you realize that the other human being that you are with on the most intimate level and forever and ever, God willing, does stuff. That person goes to the bathroom. That person, brushes their teeth a different way or uses the toilet a different way. I mean, just the stuff of humanity, but perfectly imperfect people. And then when you get to the real issues of life, you're right, sometimes you go like this, and then it can do a shift, which is, of course, the title of my newest book, Oh, Shift, with the F just a little bit below the line. And then you have to learn how to do the right kind of shift. You're right. It's you create that wonderful connection again. So I think we all know this. At least I saw it recently, and a friend of mine is a potter. So I learned this again. In Japan, the famous situation that if one drops a bowl and you want to repair it, then what you do is you now put gold. You go out and you get some gold and you repair the bowl so that it's not just along the seams, you see it, but now you have gold running along the seams. So imagine that beautiful bowl that's repaired and has little bits of gold along there. That's what happens. You something broke, you bring it back together, and it's even better because it's different. It's new. It's thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, as the Hegelian world would have it. How do you like that on a high note for philosophy? Did you like that one? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That's what happens in a great marriage. Yeah. Well, you said it, they're perfectly imperfect people. So on this high note, we will bid everybody fun to do. And as I mentioned before, we are going into the world of podcasts. So all of our marriage webinars are now going to be up on Spotify and every place else that fine podcasts can be had. So we'll be in that world going forward. And I just want to say again, a huge thank you from deep in my heart for you, Diane, and Maura and Lori making the time to do this. People all over the world love this because we're talking about something that really touches lives. We're making a difference. And, that's the best thing in the world, to go mad, make a difference. So we'll do our traditional hug, if you'd be kind enough, everybody, on the eve of the great Passover and the redemption of the people from slavery, and for all of us going from slavery into freedom and to live together in joy, happiness, peace, and love. So a hug, ready? Heartfelt, unlimited giving. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, everybody. Best wishes. See you soon. Make it a great one. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.